Thank you all very much. It's a pleasure to be here today to address you all and talk about one of my favorite topics, which is intellectual property and what it means for our businesses from a protective standpoint. Because intellectual property is not just something like that you register and go out and get. It actually has a function in your business. From an accounting standpoint, it's an unusual asset because it's an off-balance sheet asset. It's not something you're going to see because when it's formed, you expense it. So it's not appearing as a typical asset. It's in your equity section. It is also unusual in the sense that a lot of people don't know what it is. I get calls all the time that say, "Hey, Mark, I need to patent my name." Well, no, you don't. Patents cover inventions. Trademarks cover names, or more appropriately, the lawyers would say, indicators of source. So a trademark is something that zeroes you in and connects a product or a service with you as the source or sponsor of that product or service. Then there's copyrights. We have a publisher here in our midst today. Copyrights cover creative works. It could be a sculpture. It could be a book. It could be a web page. It's the code behind the web page. That is creative expression. Software is a form of property that is considered creative expression and is copyrightable. There's all kinds of stuff, customer lists, etc. So if you would advance the slides a little bit, we want to talk about various things because intellectual property disputes involving all these sorts of things we just talked about a little bit can really set your business back and create real problems. And the way to manage it is to do things right in the first place. Shocker, right? I mean, who in here isn't in a business where doing things right on the front end is profitable? We all are, right? So it's important. You have various risks: employee theft of trade secrets, espionage, so someone's breaking into your computer system and hacking and stealing your stuff, breach of contract. This could be a business vendor that you've engaged and you're disclosing information to, maybe your tech company, your IT company comes in, they see everything, right? These guys know it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, if they breach their contract and overstep their bounds, that's a problem. Violation of patents, unauthorized use of copyrighted works, some confusingly similar trademarks. That's a toughie, but that's a brand name that's too close to yours to the point that it's actionable. These are all forms of unfair competition. If you advance the slide. Effective management of these risks involves, first of all, identifying what your IP is. In order to identify your intellectual property, you've got to know what it is, right? So we talked a little bit about that. You can't go to Mark and say, patent my name, and not be telling me that you don't know what intellectual property is. You can't ask me to copyright your name and be understanding of what intellectual property is. So it's really important that you've got these breakdowns. Everybody in this room has intellectual property. Did you feel like when you came in here this morning that you had intellectual property? Okay, everybody in this room has intellectual property, and the way it's protected varies. If you would advance the slide. So we've got to understand what IP is used in your business. It might be yours, it might be someone else's. So we need to understand who owns it, and that's going to vary. And then, in order to be smart about it, we've got to rank it, right? Not everything that you own is worth the same amount to your company. So we need to get it in an order so we can make a rational decision as to how much we want to spend to protect each item of this intellectual property. We'll have a budget. Examples of IP that you might have: business secrets such as processes, or if you're a restaurant, recipes, plans of your future endeavors, customer lists, inventions covering your stuff, images, pictures you're putting on your webpage. Who took them? Whose are they? Software, books, training, films, recordings. And then in the world of trademarks, you have word marks, you have logos, which have designs wrapped around them, or maybe your words are in script or something fancy. That'd be a logo. Slogans. So this is our taglines, right? That we use. Those are slogans. And then there's something else that's kind of similar to logos. Would be trade dress. Imagine that you're driving down the street and you see this building and it's got this golden arch. What do you think that is? Well, I mean, they have protected the way their buildings look, and they may have 5 or 6 different building designs, and they protected those. So if you're a restaurant, maybe you're at a stage where you can protect that. Maybe you're just a small business and you're cramming your business into whatever space you can get for the least amount of money that you think is in a good location. Okay, you're not going to be taking a picture of the outside of the building and dealing with it, but maybe you want to have a fancy awning or your tablecloths in the space have a particular look, so that when someone walks in, they know where they are beyond looking at a name. That would be trade dress. Or when I was an in-house guy at Sharing Plow, one of our companies was Dr. Scholl's. What are Dr. Scholl's colors?
Yellow. Blue and yellow.
Blue and yellow, right? Okay. So that's more specific than that, kind of baby blue and yellow, right? The whole idea was when you're walking in the grocery store and you're looking at this shelf down there, you want to go to the blue and yellow, okay? Anybody that came up with blue and yellow that would be on that same shelf was a target for a lawsuit, because we're protecting that and making sure that that trade dress, that image, sticks and only identified Dr. Scholl as the company. That's very important to attracting the customers before they could ever see Dr. Scholl's. So there's all kinds of stuff there. If you'd advance the slide. It's also important to know who's creating it, who has access to it, what governs it. So your IP. Maybe it's created by you as an owner. Maybe it's created by an employee for you. Maybe you hired someone to do it. You had someone build your website. You've got a software suite that you're using in your business. You didn't write it. Microsoft may have written it. Well, you've got a license for that from them. Is your IP, excuse me, guys, I should have. Can't blank her out. That's my wife.
Better answer that, Mark.
Yeah. She's one of those numbers that gets the breakthrough of all of the other stops that I put on this crazy phone. Okay, so who's it accessible to? You want to know who's touching it in the course. So think of an information map. You've got data flowing in your business. You've got customer information, right? You've got names, you've got addresses, you've got phone numbers. Some of you have financial information. Some of you have health care information that's protected, and it's winding your way through the organization. If you're an organization of one, it's pretty simple, right? You've got control. It's not going out there. The minute you start delegating and bringing in others, whether they're inside your organization or outside, that information starts winding around, and those relationships are governed by applicable law or by contracts. And you need to understand, I have yet to read a contract that didn't say that I've got a limitation of liability clause in there. Yeah, we're gonna do our job, but if you sue us, you can't sue us for indirect, consequential, just name off all these crazy types of damages you can't sue us for. And it may very well have language in it that says our liability is limited to, at the max, our fees that we receive under this contract. If I were writing it for you and you were someone doing that type of business, I would make sure it had that type of language in there. So what that means is if the liability from your screw up exceeds the limits in your liability clause, the party that hired you is self-insured for that. Okay, so they either have insurance to cover their risk or whatever, but that flows back. So you need to understand this flow for a variety of reasons: ownership and risk. What's the potential exposure? You need to understand each type of relationship to understand what rights are created by that. If I have an employee and that employee writes a training manual for me, my company is actually the author by virtue of a doctrine called the work made for hire doctrine. If I hire one of you all to write that training manual for me, it's your copyrighted material, unless I include the magic language in there that says that it is a work made for hire. And we can deem it to be a work made for hire, in which case I become the author. If I don't have that language in there, ownership of the copyright remains in you unless there's a contract that assigns it over to me. So we've got to understand the law that relates to the different types of intellectual property and their origins. What's the relationship that's involved? Copyright and these things can get really complicated in this modern world where we go and hire people overseas to create stuff. You've got someone in India or China writing software for you. Well, their laws govern what's happening in their countries, and they may or may not be party, their country may or may not be party to a treaty. And we got to figure out how we're going to vest ownership in you, because you need to control your asset. So this whole process gets kind of windy that we need to understand if you advance. So it's time to create an IP strategy once you kind of have a sense of what these pathways are, who the parties are, what type of information and stuff is involved. And it starts with doing things right up front. Documenting and registering your rights. Trademarks need to be registered. I'm dealing with a company right now that was founded in 2014. And they came up with a slogan. And in 2017, in another part of the country, another party came up with the keyword in that slogan, and they registered it as a mark. They're in the same industry. That company has since grown to be massive. They have registered some 35 plus versions of their mark. And not knowing the history, they sent my client here a cease and desist letter. You need to cease and desist from using your slogan. Okay, a little bit of a shock in 2024, 10 years after you start using your slogan, to get a letter that says stop it. Well, the laws are such that I'm in a pretty good position to preserve for them the right to continue doing what they've been doing. But they're going to be hamstrung, and I don't think it matters to this particular client, but they're not going to be able to expand nationally. Their slogan, their use because they allowed this other company to come in, spend a truckload of money, and get this brand going. I had a company a few years ago, been in business in Memphis for 50 years, never registered their name. Decided they wanted to open a location in Nashville. And lo and behold, there was another company in the same industry with their portion of their name in business in Nashville. Guess what? We had to work out a deal. We had to spend a lot of money in order to enable them to expand. If you do it right, you do it on the front end and you take care of business and you protect your name, you don't have those problems like that. You're going to be more in the driver's seat. There's also good names and bad names, but we're not here to talk about trademarks today. It's a deep, deep subject. Then there's contract review, because we're talking about this residual risk that applies whenever you're hiring outside vendors to come in and help you out. Anything from collecting money off of a payment website, etc. There's a contract there that you may or may not understand. We need to make sure that you've got a grasp on what it means from a liability perspective and what you're left with, so that you can go, not necessarily even to me, but to your commercial lines insurance broker and say, hey, here's my contracts. This is what this is saying. It looks like I've got some residual risk. Am I covered? Do I have the right policies in place to cover these risks that are associated with handling this type of information or whatever? Some risks are not insurable, and those are risks that we manage through contracts and the like. Policies and procedures. Do you have appropriate policies in place in your business so that your staff knows what's going on from an employee standpoint, that's telling them what happens when they're terminated, that they've got to return the information? Do you have a practice of having an exit interview with your employees to remind them of their post-termination obligations, and that they have an obligation to provide you back with all of the materials? If you don't, I promise you that when they leave, they're not necessarily thinking about screwing you and your business. They're tuned into where their next gig is going to be and what's going on. But if most of us use our cell phones in our businesses, we use our personal laptops and things in our businesses. So there's your business information scattered about, probably your customer names, your customer contact information, all of these things that are important for the preservation of your world are on their phone and on their laptops and whatnot. So you need to claw that back and have the right policies and procedures and agreements in place to enable you to do that. Commercial insurance review, we talked about that briefly. Training is key. People don't know what intellectual property is. So some discussion. If it's if I ask you what your business records were, you'd all be able to tell me what a business record is. It's complicated a little bit today from the standpoint of ownership. We all own our business records, but sometimes they're subject to restraints. Take healthcare information as an example. The healthcare information, her customer list, the types of disease states that they're engaged in treating and have skills to do, all of that experience, the statistics related to what's going on in their world, they own, but their customers have, from a public policy perspective, the right to control their privacy of their information, right? And so the HIPAA laws and other privacy regs layer in on top of these things and color what you can do and what processes you have to have in place to protect certain stuff. And so training is key. Monitoring and enforcement is the next thing. you got to make sure that you're attuned to what's going on out there in the broader scheme of things, because other people may try to edge in on your turf a little bit. So your trademark is one circle. If the old Venn diagram, that we all studied in school with the overlaps. Sure. The circles. So you think you got a trademark here, and it gives you kind of protection from people with names that are similar. Then you may have your patent. It's a monopoly. So no one can come in there and directly compete. Your copyright is kind of a gatekeeper kind of software. You control who comes in your backyard or in your house, who gets to see it, and what they get to do with it once they have exposure to it. Trade secrets, another gatekeeper type of thing. You control who has access. You need to have reasonable security precautions in place to protect it in order to preserve its value. You've got to do monitoring and enforcement. When those lines are crossed, if you're not sending out cease and desist letters and taking some action, then they're going to chip away at the edges of your rights and jump into your turf. So an intellectual property strategy is one that kind of uses all these different forms that are applicable to your business, protects them, and creates these barriers to keep people out of your space so that you can compete fairly in the marketplace. Next slide. That may be it. Yeah. Yep. So any questions of me? Sure.
Can you talk briefly about, we hear a lot about China and the encroachment she's making, that country is making and doing an awful lot of things in this regard with production and how they're copying things out there. What's your professional opinion on the encroachment of China into our business?
Well, I wouldn't say it's just China. First of all, I think that's unfair. It would be same scenario in a lot of different countries. There is proper copying and improper copying, if you will. There certainly is a lot of industrial espionage, and the Chinese have been particularly adept, particularly of Chinese residents here who have family in China, can find themselves blackmailed into disclosing information by threats to their family back in the mainland. But that's not just China. That can happen in other communist countries or other countries that are corrupt, if you will. So copying is a problem. The Chinese are great at manufacturing because they're really good at implementing these processes and procedures that we have. So it's a skill set. It's just something that needs to be controlled. And I think most businesses, this monitoring and enforcement process. If you're not actually going over there and or have a team over there that can ride herd and make sure that whoever your manufacturer is in India or wherever doesn't have two sets of books that they're using and playing games, then you're just asking to be taken advantage of because they're out of sight. I mean, they're across the pond and not here for you to look at. The same thing happens closer to home with the computer systems. Fraud happens in dark, closed off places where you can't see them. That's where people take maximum advantage of their deal. Things we don't understand, etc. So, anytime you're letting someone in, I don't know what's going on with this phone. I mean, who knows what this thing is sending out right now? I don't have a clue. And there's nothing on there.
And your wife called you.
And my wife, I mean, she keeps tracking me down. This says as soon as you can. So anyway, it's been a pleasure speaking to you all today. Thank you for having me.